The night was calm in the suburban neighborhood of Virginia, where rows of houses stood quietly under the dim glow of streetlights. Officer Daniel Harper sat in his patrol car, sipping lukewarm coffee while glancing at the clock on his dashboard. It had been a slow shift until the radio crackled to life. Dispatch reported a suspicious person lurking near one of the quieter streets. The caller described a tall man wearing dark clothing, pacing back and forth as if planning something suspicious. Daniel sighed, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped out of the car. His K-9 partner, Max, trotted beside him, his ears perked up and alert. Max was a loyal German shepherd with years of training under his belt. Together, they made a reliable team. As they approached the location, Daniel scanned the area. The neighborhood seemed peaceful, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Near a parked car, Daniel spotted a figure standing in the shadows. The man appeared to be middle-aged, dressed in a dark jacket and slacks. He looked over his shoulder, seemingly startled by the sight of the officer and his dog. Daniel called out, "Sir, can I have a word with you?" The man froze for a moment before reaching into his pocket. "Stop right there," Daniel shouted, his voice firm. But the man didn't stop. Instead, he pulled out an object, a wallet, it turned out, and held it up. "I'm just trying to show you my ID," he said calmly. To Daniel, however, the movement looked threatening. In the heat of the moment, he gave the command he had drilled into Max countless times: "Apprehend." Max lunged forward without hesitation, tackling the man to the ground. The man struggled, yelling, "I'm a U.S. Army general. Stop this." But Daniel, overwhelmed by adrenaline, failed to process the words. By the time he realized what was happening, it was too late. Max's powerful jaws had already done irreversible damage. Panting, Daniel rushed to pull Max off the man, who now lay motionless on the pavement. Blood pooled beneath him as Daniel frantically called for backup and medical assistance. The man's wallet slipped from his hand, revealing a military ID card. General Marcus Holloway, it read. A decorated soldier who had served his country for decades. As paramedics arrived and worked desperately to save the general's life, Daniel felt his world crumble around him. Who was this man? Why hadn't he listened more carefully? And how could he explain this to anyone, not just his superiors, but the community he swore to protect? News of the incident spread like wildfire. Social media erupted with outrage. Videos capturing snippets of the scene went viral, and protests began forming outside the police station. For Daniel, the days that followed were a blur of guilt, confusion, and fear. He replayed the events in his mind over and over again, searching for answers that wouldn't come. Meanwhile, across town, a young woman named Ava Holloway woke up to a phone call that would change her life forever. On the other end of the line, her mother's voice trembled as she delivered the devastating news. Ava's father, General Marcus Holloway, was gone. The weight of those words hit Ava like a freight train. Her hero, her rock, her dad, the man who always told her she could conquer anything, was taken away in an instant. And as the details of his death emerged, Ava's grief quickly turned into anger. How could this happen? Why did no one listen to him? These questions burned inside her, fueling a fire that would drive her to seek justice, even if it meant uncovering truths she wasn't ready to face. The days following General Marcus Holloway's death felt like an endless nightmare for his family. Ava Holloway, only 17 years old, struggled to make sense of the sudden void in her life. Her father had always been her anchor, the one person she could count on no matter what. He was the kind of man who worked hard, but never missed a school play or soccer game. His booming laugh and warm hugs were constants in her world, and now they were gone forever. Ava's mother, Elena, tried her best to hold everything together, but the pain was too much. She spent hours sitting alone in the living room, staring at old photos of Marcus in his army uniform. Sometimes she would cry silently, clutching one of his jackets as if it could bring him back. Other times, she snapped at reporters calling their house or strangers leaving messages online. "They don't know him," she muttered bitterly. "They don't know anything about who he really was." For Ava, grief came in waves. One moment, she'd feel numb, unable to focus on anything. Not schoolwork, not friends, not even her favorite songs. The next, anger would surge through her like a storm. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. Her dad hadn't done anything wrong. He was just coming home from work when this tragedy happened. Every time she thought about how scared he must have felt, lying there alone, her chest tightened until it became hard to breathe. To cope, Ava began spending more time in her dad's study, a small room filled with books, medals, and mementos from his military career. Among the shelves, she found a box labeled "Important Documents." Curious, she opened it and started sifting through its contents. Inside were letters, certificates, and files, things she had never seen before. One folder caught her eye. It was marked "Confidential" in bold red letters. Her heart raced as she flipped through the pages. What she discovered shocked her. Her father hadn't just been a decorated general. He had also been working secretly with the FBI. The documents outlined details of a major corruption investigation involving several high-ranking officials in local law enforcement. Names, dates, and evidence, all carefully documented. Ava's hands trembled as she read further. Was this why he was killed? Had someone wanted to silence him? The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. If her dad's death wasn't an accident, then the people responsible needed to pay. But how could she prove it? She was just a teenager, and the system seemed stacked against her. Still, something inside her refused to give up. Her father had taught her to stand up for what was right, no matter how difficult the fight might be. And now, that lesson carried more weight than ever. As Ava sat surrounded by her father's things, memories flooded back to her. She remembered the long talks they used to have late at night, where he'd share stories about his time in the army. He often spoke about duty, honor, and sacrifice, not just in battle, but in everyday life. Sometimes, doing the right thing means standing alone, he'd say. Those words echoed in her mind now, giving her strength. But there was another emotion bubbling beneath the surface. Fear. Fear of what might happen if she dug too deep. Fear of losing her mom, who already looked broken beyond repair. Fear of finding out something she wasn't ready to face. Yet despite all that, Ava knew she couldn't stay silent. Not when the truth was within reach. Slowly, she closed the folder and placed it back in the box. Whatever it took, she vowed to uncover the full story behind her father's death, even if it meant risking everything. Outside, the world continued spinning, oblivious to the turmoil brewing inside Ava's heart. Protesters marched through the streets, demanding justice for General Holloway. News anchors debated whether the incident was an isolated case of police misconduct or part of a larger pattern of systemic racism. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Harper wrestled with his own demons, haunted by the knowledge that he had played a role in destroying a family. For everyone involved, the road ahead promised to be long, painful, and uncertain. But for Ava, it was clear. She wouldn't stop until she uncovered the truth and made sure her father's legacy lived on. Ava couldn't stop thinking about the documents she had found in her father's study. The more she read them, the angrier and more confused she became. How could her dad, a respected army general, be tangled up in something so dangerous? And why hadn't he told anyone in the family about it? Her mind raced with questions, but one thing was clear. If his death wasn't an accident, then someone out there knew exactly what had happened. Determined to find answers, Ava decided to dig deeper into her father's past. She started by going through old photo albums and letters, searching for anything that might give her a clue. One evening, as she flipped through a dusty scrapbook, she stumbled upon something unusual, an envelope addressed to her grandfather. It was postmarked years ago, long before Ava was born, and written in her father's neat handwriting. Curious, Ava opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter filled with heartfelt words and apologies. "Dad," it began, "I know we haven't spoken in years, and I'm sorry for that. I hope someday you can forgive me for choosing a different path than the one you wanted for me. But please know that everything I've done has been for the greater good." The letter ended with a cryptic sentence: "If anything ever happens to me, look for the truth where justice hides." Ava stared at the words, her heart pounding. Who was this dad her father was writing to? Growing up, Ava had always believed her paternal grandfather was dead. He was never mentioned, and no pictures of him existed in their home. Yet here was proof that he was alive, or at least had been when this letter was written. Could he have information about her father's investigation? Did he even know what Marcus had been working on? With trembling hands, Ava turned the envelope over and noticed a return address scribbled faintly on the back. It led to Washington, D.C., a place her father often visited during his assignments. Without hesitation, Ava grabbed her phone and searched for the name James Whittaker, the person listed as the recipient. To her astonishment, dozens of articles popped up. James Whittaker was a senior FBI agent who had spent decades working on high-profile cases involving corruption and organized crime. Her breath caught in her throat. This man, her grandfather, wasn't just some distant figure. He was someone powerful, someone who might hold the key to understanding her father's death. But why had her parents kept him a secret? And why had her father reached out to him after all those years of silence? The next morning, Ava sat down with her mom, trying to broach the subject gently. "Mom," she said hesitantly, "did Dad ever talk about his dad?" "My grandfather." Elena froze, her face pale. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, sighing heavily, she nodded. "Your grandfather. He and your father had a falling out years ago. They didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things. Your dad thought he cared more about power than people." "But is he still alive?" Ava pressed. Elena hesitated before answering softly, "Yes, he's alive. He works for the FBI. But Ava, trust me, it's better if we leave the past alone. Some wounds don't heal." Ava wanted to argue, to tell her mom that staying silent wouldn't bring her dad back. But she could see the pain in her mother's eyes and knew now wasn't the time. Instead, she quietly excused herself and retreated to her room, her mind buzzing with possibilities. If her grandfather really was an FBI agent, maybe he could help her uncover the truth. Maybe he owed it to her, and to her father, to try. That night, Ava mustered the courage to write him a letter. She poured her heart into every word, explaining who she was, what had happened to her dad, and why she needed his help. When she finished, she sealed the envelope and wrote the address from the old letter on the front. As she dropped it into the mailbox the next day, she felt a mix of fear and hope. Would he respond? Would he care? Or would he turn his back on her, just like he had on her father years ago? For days, Ava checked the mail obsessively, waiting for a reply. Each passing day felt like an eternity. Meanwhile, the protests outside grew louder, and news outlets continued dissecting her father's case. Everyone seemed to have an opinion, but no one truly understood the weight of what her family was going through. Ava clung to the hope that her grandfather might be different, that he might finally give her the answers she desperately needed. Little did she know, reaching out to him would set off a chain of events that would change everything, for better or worse. Days turned into a week, and just as Ava began to lose hope that her letter would ever reach her grandfather, or worse, that he might ignore it altogether, an envelope appeared in the mailbox. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the return address. Washington, D.C. With trembling hands, she tore it open and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was sharp and precise, each word carefully chosen. "Dear Ava," it began, "I received your letter, and I want you to know how deeply sorry I am for your loss. Your father, Marcus, was my son, though we hadn't spoken in years. I won't lie to you. He broke my heart when he walked away from the path I wanted him to take. But despite our differences, I loved him more than words can say." Ava's eyes filled with tears as she read on. Her grandfather explained that he had followed Marcus's career from afar, proud of his accomplishments, but too stubborn to reach out. Now, learning about his death, and the circumstances surrounding it, shook him to his core. He admitted that he didn't know much about the investigation Marcus had been working on, but he promised to help however he could. "If there's even a chance this wasn't an accident," he wrote, "then we owe it to him to find out the truth." The letter ended with a phone number and an invitation to meet in person if she felt comfortable. For the first time since her father's death, Ava felt a flicker of hope. Here was someone who not only understood the gravity of what had happened, but also had the resources to dig deeper. Still, she couldn't shake the nervousness twisting in her stomach. What if he couldn't be trusted? What if this was all too big for her to handle? After debating for hours, Ava finally mustered the courage to call the number. A deep, steady voice answered on the second ring. "Agent Whittaker," it said. Ava hesitated for a moment before speaking. "This is Ava Holloway. My dad. He was your son." There was a long pause on the other end, heavy with emotion. When he spoke again, his voice cracked slightly. "Ava, thank you for reaching out. I've thought about you and your family every day since I heard the news. Tell me, what do you need?" Over the next hour, Ava poured out everything she knew. The confidential documents, the protests, the whispers of corruption within law enforcement. She told him about the protests outside the police station and the growing public demand for accountability. Agent Whittaker listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering reassurances without making promises he couldn't keep. By the end of the conversation, they agreed to meet face-to-face in Washington, D.C., where he worked. When Ava arrived at the FBI field office 2 days later, nerves prickled under her skin. The building loomed large and imposing, its glass walls reflecting the gray sky above. Inside, she was greeted by a tall man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, the same ones she remembered seeing in old photos of her father. As they embraced awkwardly, Ava realized how much he looked like Marcus, right down to the set of his jaw. They sat down in a quiet conference room, and Ava handed over copies of the documents she found. Agent Whittaker studied them carefully, his expression unreadable. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "This is bigger than I thought," he admitted. "These names, they are connected to some dangerous people. If Marcus was onto something, it's no wonder someone wanted him silenced." For the first time, Ava allowed herself to feel a glimmer of relief. She wasn't alone anymore. With her grandfather's experience and connections, maybe they stood a chance at uncovering the truth. But as Agent Whittaker warned her, the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Powerful people didn't give up their secrets willingly, and digging into their affairs came with risks. "I'll protect you, Ava," he said firmly. "But you need to promise me one thing. Don't go looking into this on your own. We're in this together now." Ava nodded, feeling both scared and determined. For the first time since her world fell apart, she had someone fighting beside her, not just for justice, but for her father's legacy. And though the battle ahead seemed daunting, she knew she couldn't turn back now. The partnership between Ava and Agent Whittaker quickly turned into a whirlwind of late-night meetings, whispered phone calls, and endless research. They worked tirelessly, piecing together fragments of evidence from the documents Marcus had left behind. Each new discovery painted a clearer picture of the corruption that had infiltrated local law enforcement, a web of bribes, illegal deals, and cover-ups involving some of the most powerful figures in the department. Agent Whittaker used his FBI credentials to dig deeper, pulling files and records that would have been impossible for Ava to access on her own. He showed her how to analyze bank statements, trace suspicious transactions, and connect dots that seemed unrelated at first glance. For Ava, it was overwhelming but exhilarating. She felt like she was finally doing something real, to honor her father's memory. But as they uncovered more, the danger grew closer. One evening, while reviewing security footage from the night of General Holloway's death, they noticed something alarming. A car parked several blocks away had remained stationary for hours before driving off shortly after the incident. The license plate matched a vehicle registered to an officer in Daniel Harper's precinct, a man named Detective Ray Collins, who had recently been promoted despite a history of misconduct allegations. "This isn't just about your dad anymore," Agent Whittaker said grimly, pointing to the screen. "It's about protecting anyone else from becoming collateral damage. These people aren't going to stop unless we force them to." Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Harper was beginning to feel like he was losing his grip on reality. Ever since the fatal encounter with General Holloway, he'd been plagued by guilt and insomnia. But lately, things had taken a darker turn. His colleagues, once friendly and supportive, now treated him with cold indifference, or worse, hostility. Conversations stopped whenever he entered a room, and whispers followed him down hallways. It didn't take long for Daniel to realize something was terribly wrong. One day, while sorting through paperwork in the precinct's archives, Daniel stumbled upon a file labeled Operation Clean Slate. Inside were memos detailing plans to silence key individuals threatening to expose corruption within the department. Among those listed was General Marcus Holloway. Daniel's stomach churned as he read further. Someone high up in the chain of command had known exactly what they were doing when they sent him to respond to that call. He hadn't just made a tragic mistake. He'd been set up. Panicked, Daniel tried confronting his superior, Captain Monroe, demanding answers. But Monroe brushed him off, warning him not to meddle in matters beyond his pay grade. "You've already caused enough trouble, Harper," Monroe snapped. "Just keep your head down and do your job." That night, unable to sleep, Daniel sat alone in his apartment, staring at the files spread out on his kitchen table. He couldn't ignore the truth any longer. The people he worked with, the people he trusted, were part of something rotten. And if he stayed silent, he'd be complicit in their crimes. But speaking out came with its own risks. Who would believe him? Would anyone even care? As fate would have it, Daniel's turmoil intersected with Eva and Agent Whittaker's investigation in an unexpected way. Desperate for help, Daniel reached out anonymously, leaving cryptic messages online under a fake username. He uploaded snippets of the Operation Clean Slate file to a secure server, hoping someone would find them. To his surprise, Ava and Agent Whittaker did. When they realized the source of the leak, Ava hesitated. Could they trust Daniel? Was this another trap? But Agent Whittaker reminded her that Daniel might be their only ally inside the precinct. "He's scared, Ava," Whittaker said. "And guilt can make people unpredictable. We need to handle this carefully." Reluctantly, Ava agreed to meet Daniel in secret. At a quiet park late one evening, they exchanged information cautiously. Daniel confessed everything: the setup, the pressure from his superiors, and his growing fear for his safety. In return, Ava shared what she and her grandfather had uncovered so far. By the end of the meeting, a fragile alliance had formed. Though neither fully trusted the other, they understood one thing clearly: if they wanted justice, they'd have to fight together, even if it meant risking everything. As the three of them prepared to take their findings public, tensions escalated. Threats began arriving in the form of anonymous notes and strange phone calls. Someone knew they were getting close, and they weren't going to let the truth see the light without a fight. The day of the press conference arrived, and Ava stood backstage at a crowded community center, her hands trembling as she clutched a folder filled with evidence. Reporters packed the room, their cameras flashing like strobe lights. Outside, protesters held signs demanding justice for General Marcus Holloway, their chants echoing through the walls. This was it, the moment Ava had been working toward. But as much as she tried to focus, her mind kept replaying the risks involved. If they exposed the corruption, there would be consequences, dangerous ones. Agent Whittaker stood beside her, his calm demeanor masking the tension in his eyes. "You ready?" he asked softly. Ava nodded, though her stomach felt like it was tied in knots. She glanced over at Daniel, who sat nervously in the front row. He had insisted on being there, even though showing up publicly could make him a target. For better or worse, they were all in this together now. As Ava stepped onto the podium, the room fell silent. Dozens of eyes locked onto her, some curious, others skeptical. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. "My name is Ava Holloway," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "And I'm here today because my father, General Marcus Holloway, was killed not by accident, but by a system that thrives on lies and fear." She went on to explain everything. The confidential documents her father had gathered, the Operation Clean Slate file leaked by Daniel, and the names of officers implicated in the corruption ring. With each revelation, gasps rippled through the crowd. When she displayed surveillance footage of Detective Ray Collins' car near the scene of her father's death, murmurs turned into outright outrage. The room buzzed with energy, a mix of anger and disbelief. Just as Ava was about to reveal the final piece of evidence, a recorded conversation between Captain Monroe and one of the corrupt officials, an aide rushed forward, whispering urgently in her ear. Someone had tipped off the suspects. Officers linked to the scandal were already moving to destroy evidence and discredit the investigation. Time was running out. Agent Whittaker sprang into action, guiding Ava offstage while instructing security to lock down the building. Meanwhile, Daniel intercepted a call from his precinct warning him to distance himself from the press conference or face retaliation. His hand shook as he ended the call, realizing how far-reaching the conspiracy truly was. Backstage, Ava and Whittaker quickly uploaded the remaining evidence to multiple online platforms, ensuring it couldn't be erased. As the data spread across social media and news outlets, public reaction exploded. Protesters outside grew louder, chanting slogans like, "No more cover-ups," and "Justice for Marcus." The story dominated headlines nationwide, shining a harsh spotlight on the corrupt officers and their enablers. But the backlash came swiftly. Within hours, Ava received threatening messages on her phone, warning her to back off. Her home address appeared in anonymous comments online, forcing her and her mother to move temporarily under FBI protection. Daniel faced similar threats. His car was vandalized overnight, and colleagues openly shunned him. Even Agent Whittaker wasn't spared. He became a target within the Bureau, accused of overstepping boundaries and jeopardizing ongoing investigations. Despite the danger, none of them backed down. They knew the fight wasn't just about avenging General Holloway anymore. It was about dismantling a system built on inequality and abuse of power. Together, they gave interviews, testified before city councils, and worked tirelessly to ensure no stone was left unturned. Slowly but surely, cracks began to form in the wall of corruption. Detectives once untouchable found themselves under scrutiny. Captain Monroe resigned amid mounting pressure, and several officers were suspended pending internal reviews. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, Ava felt a small sense of victory. For the first time since her father's death, she believed change was possible. Still, the cost of their actions weighed heavily on all of them. Trust was fragile, lives were disrupted, and the scars ran deep. Yet through it all, Ava, Daniel, and Agent Whittaker shared a quiet understanding. They had done what was right, even when it was hardest. And sometimes, that was enough to keep going. The fallout from the press conference was immediate and explosive. Within days, arrests began rolling in as federal agents descended on the precinct like a storm. Detective Ray Collins was one of the first to be taken into custody, his smug demeanor crumbling under questioning. Captain Monroe, who had tried to flee the country, was detained at the airport with a suitcase full of cash. The evidence Ava, Agent Whittaker, and Daniel had gathered painted an undeniable picture of corruption, greed, and betrayal. But dismantling the network wasn't easy. Many officers lawyered up, claiming they were just following orders or unaware of the larger scheme. Others turned on each other, desperate to save themselves by pointing fingers. It became clear that the rot ran deep. Years of unchecked power and complicity had allowed these crimes to fester. Each revelation brought new outrage from the public, but also fear. If such corruption could thrive in one department, how many others were hiding similar secrets? For Ava, the victory felt hollow. Yes, justice was being served, but it didn't bring her father back. She spent hours staring at old photos of him, wishing she could hear his laugh one more time. Her mother, Elena, struggled too, retreating into herself as the media circus continued. Despite their newfound protection from the FBI, neither of them felt safe. Threats still trickled in, anonymous letters, eerie phone calls, even strangers glaring at them in public. The weight of it all pressed down on Ava, making her question if this fight had been worth the cost. Daniel faced his own battles. Once respected in his community, he now walked through the precinct like a ghost, avoided by former friends and mocked by enemies. Some blamed him for exposing the scandal. Others saw him as a traitor. His superiors stripped him of duties, leaving him to shuffle papers in a forgotten corner of the station. At night, he sat alone in his apartment, replaying the moment Max attacked General Holloway over and over in his mind. Guilt gnawed at him relentlessly, no matter how many times people told him it wasn't entirely his fault. Yet, amid the chaos, something unexpected happened. Redemption began to take root. During the trial of Captain Monroe and Detective Collins, Daniel took the stand, his voice trembling but resolute. He admitted his role in General Holloway's death, describing the events without excuses or defenses. "I failed," he said simply. "But I'm here now because silence isn't an option, not anymore." His testimony struck a chord. Protesters who had once vilified him started seeing him as a man trying to make amends. Even Ava found herself softening toward him, though forgiveness remained a distant hope. Still, their shared goal united them, ensuring that no family would suffer the way hers had. Agent Whittaker worked tirelessly behind the scenes, using his influence to push for reforms within law enforcement. He lobbied for stricter accountability measures, mandatory ethics training, and independent oversight boards. Though progress was slow, his efforts inspired change in nearby departments, creating a ripple effect across the region. As the trials dragged on, Ava noticed a shift in her relationship with her grandfather. At first, their alliance had been purely practical, a means to uncover the truth. But over time, they grew closer. Whittaker shared stories about Marcus as a boy, filling in gaps Ava hadn't realized were missing. For the first time, she saw her father not just as a hero, but as a person, with flaws, dreams, and struggles of his own. One evening, after another long day of legal proceedings, Ava and Whittaker sat together on the porch of the safe house where she and her mother were staying. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "You've done good work, Ava," Whittaker said quietly. "Your dad would be proud." Tears welled in her eyes, but she managed a small smile. "I just wish you were here to see it." Whittaker nodded, his expression heavy with regret. "Me too, but you're carrying his legacy forward, and that matters." In that moment, Ava realized something important. Justice wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And while the scars of loss would always remain, she had found purpose in honoring her father's memory. With her grandfather by her side, and allies like Daniel fighting alongside her, she knew they were laying the groundwork for a better future, one step at a time. Months passed, and the storm that had upended so many lives began to settle. The trials of Captain Monroe, Detective Ray Collins, and other corrupt officers came to an end, with guilty verdicts handed down in nearly every case. Community leaders praised the outcome as a step toward accountability, though they warned that true reform would take years, if not decades, of effort. For Ava, the courtroom victories felt bittersweet. Justice had been served, but it couldn't undo the pain or bring her father back. Still, life slowly started finding its rhythm again. Ava returned to school, carrying her grief differently now. She joined the debate team, channeling her passion for justice into speeches about systemic inequality and police reform. Her classmates admired her courage, unaware of how much she still struggled inside. Some nights, when she lay awake staring at the ceiling, she wondered if things would ever feel normal again. But then she'd remember her father's words, "Stand up for what's right." And somehow, those words gave her strength to keep going. Daniel Harper, too, found a new path forward. Though he resigned from the force, he didn't walk away from law enforcement entirely. Instead, he became a trainer for K-9 units, teaching handlers how to prevent tragedies like the one involving Max. He also volunteered with organizations focused on rebuilding trust between police and marginalized communities. It wasn't easy. Some people refused to forgive him, and reminders of his past mistakes followed him everywhere. But Daniel accepted it as part of his penance. Every time he helped someone understand the importance of restraint and empathy, he felt a little closer to redemption. Agent Whitaker retired shortly after the scandal broke, choosing to spend more time with his family, including Ava. Their bond deepened over shared meals and quiet conversations about Marcus's legacy. Together, they established a foundation in his name, aimed at supporting families affected by police violence and advocating for transparency in law enforcement. Whitaker often joked that Marcus would have rolled his eyes at all the attention, but Ava knew her father would have been proud. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ava stood beside her grandfather at the unveiling of a memorial plaque dedicated to General Marcus Holloway. It was placed near the spot where he had died, surrounded by flowers and candles left by strangers who had been moved by his story. As Ava traced the engraved words, "A life of service, a legacy of justice," tears streamed down her face. But this time, they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, for the love her father had given her, for the truth she had fought to uncover, and for the hope that his death might inspire meaningful change. Later that evening, Ava sat alone in her room, flipping through the scrapbook she had started during the investigation. Inside were newspaper clippings, photos from protests, and letters from supporters across the country. On the last page, she taped a note she had written herself. "Dad, I'll never stop fighting for what you believed in." As she closed the book, a sense of peace washed over her, not because everything was perfect, but because she finally understood that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about carrying the lessons of the past into the future. Somewhere, she imagined her father smiling down on her, proud of the woman she had become. In the months and years that followed, Ava continued her advocacy work, speaking at rallies and mentoring young activists. Daniel found solace in helping others avoid the mistakes he had made, and Agent Whitaker, now gray-haired and slower-moving, watched with quiet pride as his granddaughter carried the torch her father had lit. Though their scars remained, they had learned to live with them, not as burdens, but as reminders of the resilience it took to stand up against injustice. Together, they proved that even in the darkest moments, light could break through, and that sometimes, standing alone was the bravest thing you could do.